Let me tell you exactly how stupid the whole thing was. I was arguing about grain taxes, not about anything romantic, not about fate or destiny or the sacred will of the moon goddess. I was standing in the middle of the Ironvale Market Square in the rain, holding a soaked ledger against my chest, telling the Alpha King of the Crestfall Empire that his tax collectors had miscalculated the Borderland harvest assessment by 32%, and that actual people were actually going hungry because of it. And he was looking at me with the particular expression of a man who has never once in his life been spoken to this way and cannot decide if he is furious or something else entirely. He chose furious. For about 4 more minutes. Then he kissed me. And everything broke open. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning, which is not the market square. The beginning is 3 weeks earlier, in a records room in the lower administrative wing of Crestfall Citadel, where I was not supposed to be. My name is Sarah. I am 22 years old. I am the appointed records keeper for the Borderland Settlement Coalition, and I have a particular problem, which is that I cannot leave things alone when they are wrong. This is not a virtue. My mother told me this regularly. My supervisor at the coalition told me this. The 2 guards who escorted me out of 3 separate council meetings told me this with decreasing patience. Wrong things pull at me the way a loose thread pulls at fingers. You know you should leave it. You pull anyway. The wrong thing I had found 3 weeks ago was this. The harvest tax records for the eastern borderlands had been assessed using yield projections from 4 years prior, before the drought seasons had reduced output significantly. The result was that settlements along the eastern ridge were being taxed at roughly 30% above their actual capacity to pay. Not through malice, as far as I could determine. Through negligence. Through someone in the assessment office not updating a formula and nobody above them checking closely enough. The result was real, and it was happening to real people. Families I knew, villages I had grown up near, people who were selling tools to pay taxes on crops they had not grown because the numbers on someone's ledger were 4 years out of date. I had filed the formal correction request through the coalition office 6 weeks ago. It had gone to the regional administrator, who had forwarded it to the Capital Assessment Bureau, who had sent back a response indicating that the matter was under review. Under review is the administrative way of saying, we have put your problem in a drawer and closed the drawer. I opened the drawer. Specifically, I obtained access to the lower records room of the Crestfall administrative wing through a combination of a legitimate coalition, access pass, and the fact that the guard on duty at the 7th bell was a man named Aldous who was deeply absorbed in his lunch and waved people through without looking up if they held something official looking at, chest height. I spent 4 hours in that records room. I found what I needed. I built a complete corrected assessment using current yield data, cross-referenced against 3 independent sources. I put it in a new ledger. I made 2 copies. Then I went home and wrote a formal petition and submitted it through every official channel available to the coalition. 3 more weeks passed. Nothing, which is how I ended up in the market square on a rainy Tuesday, which was the day the Alpha King made his quarterly public progress through the capital market district, which was a tradition apparently designed to demonstrate accessibility and connection to common citizens, which in practice meant he rode through on a black horse looking cold and commanding while people moved out of his way. I did not move out of his way. I want to be clear that this was not a plan. I had the corrected ledger with me, because I had the corrected ledger with me always at this point. The way you carry something that is unfinished and will not let you put it down. I saw the procession coming. I saw the gap in the crowd where people had stepped back. And something in me, the same something that cannot leave wrong things alone, stepped forward instead. His horse stopped because it had to. The guard to his left had a sword half out before I held up the ledger and said, loudly and clearly because the rain was loud, I have a formal correction to the Eastern Borderland harvest assessment that has been under administrative review for 9 weeks, and I would like 60 seconds of your time. Silence. Rain. The sound of my own heartbeat. The Alpha King looked down at me from his horse with an expression that could have frozen the market square solid. He was exactly what you would expect from his reputation. Tall, even mounted, broad across the shoulders, dark hair rain damp, a jaw that seemed to have been constructed specifically to convey authority. His eyes were a dark gold that in the gray rain light looked almost amber, and they were looking at me with an intensity that most people probably experienced as intimidating. I was intimidated. I was also not moving. You are standing in front of my horse, he said. His voice was deep and very controlled. Yes, I said. 60 seconds. That is all I am asking. You are aware there are formal channels for citizen petitions. I have used every single one of them, I said, for 9 weeks. The matter is under review, which appears to mean nothing is happening while people go hungry. Something moved in his expression, not softening, more like a door opening a crack. Move aside, said the guard to his left. His hand was still near his sword. Let her speak, said the Alpha King. I spoke, not 60 seconds. About 4 minutes. I had the numbers memorized. I gave them clearly, in order, with the source references. The rain came down. The market square stayed quiet around us, people watching with the frozen attention of an audience that has just realized the performance they wandered into is real. When I finished, he looked at me for a long moment. Come to the administrative hall at the second bell tomorrow, he said. Bring the ledger. Then he rode on. I stood in the rain holding my soaked ledger and tried to remember how my legs worked. I was 20 minutes early. This was not nerves. I am always early. Punctuality is the only social grace I possess with any consistency, and I hold on to it the way a person with one good tool holds on to that tool. The administrative hall of Crestfall Citadel was not the grand ceremonial spaces I had seen from the outside. It was functional and large, with long tables covered in documents and clerks moving between them with the focused energy of people who have more work than hours. The ceiling was high, but plain. The floor was worn stone. It smelled of ink and old paper and the particular dry staleness of a room where windows were not opened often enough. A young clerk led me to a side room that was smaller and quieter. A table, chairs, a window with a gray morning view of the inner courtyard, a tray with tea on it that nobody had poured yet. I sat down and put my ledger on the table and waited. He came in 7 minutes after the second bell. Alone, which surprised me. No guards, no advisors, no council members. Just him, in what I was beginning to understand was his working appearance as opposed to his procession appearance. The heavy ceremonial cloak was gone. Dark fitted jacket, practical, good quality without being ornate. He looked, without the horse and the procession and the rain-dramatic lighting of yesterday, like a very large, very tired man who had been awake since before dawn. He sat across from me without preamble and looked at the ledger. "Show me the discrepancy," he said. I showed him. Page by page, methodically, the way I had done it 100 times in my own head, current yield data against the 4-year-old projections still being used for assessment. The gap between them, the resulting overtaxation figure, the number of settlements affected, the number of people inside those settlements. He did not interrupt. He did not ask me to slow down or explain myself or justify my presence here. He just read what I showed him and listened to what I said, and his expression as he went through it was the expression of someone doing genuine calculations, not performing attention. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "How long have you been working on this?" he asked. The correction itself took me 2 days to build once I had access to the records, I said. Getting access took longer. You obtained access to the administrative records room. Yes, through the Aldous Gap, he said. Not a question. I looked at him. You know about that. We call it the Aldous Gap internally, he said. He has been on the 7th Bellgate for 11 years, and he has never once looked up from his lunch. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The shadow of one. We keep him there deliberately at this point. It tells us who is determined enough to use it. I stared at him. You're using him as a filter. A self-selecting filter, he said. People who care enough to find the gap tend to have found something worth caring about. He looked back at the ledger. In this case, that is accurate. I absorbed this. The formal petition channels are real and necessary and genuinely overwhelmed, he said. 9 weeks for a Borderland assessment correction is too long. I will not pretend otherwise. He closed the ledger and looked at me directly. What is your name? Sarah, I said. Sarah Voss. I'm the appointed records keeper for the Borderland Settlement Coalition. Voss, he repeated. Eastern Ridge family? My mother's family is from Hallows Creek, I said. On the ridge. He nodded once. Something in his face had shifted. Not warmer exactly. More present. Like a door that had opened a crack yesterday had opened a little further. The assessment will be corrected, he said. I will have the Bureau recalculate using current data within the week. The over-collected amounts will be credited against next season's assessment for the affected settlements. I had been prepared to argue for this for another 20 minutes at minimum. I had counter-arguments organized. I had secondary data ready. I stopped. Thank you. Don't thank me, he said. This should have been caught internally. The fact that it required a citizen to stand in front of my horse in the rain is a failure of our review process, not a success of it. He stood. The meeting was apparently over. I will have the Bureau contact the Coalition office with the correction timeline. He moved toward the door. I gathered my ledger. Can I ask you something? I said. He paused. He did not turn fully, just a slight pause in his movement. Why did you stop? I said. Yesterday there were 20 people in that crowd who stepped back. Most people would have had the guard move me aside. Why did you stop? A longer pause this time. Because you were holding that ledger, he said, like it was the most important thing in the square. He did not look back. That tends to mean it actually is. He left. I stood in the small room with my corrected ledger and the untouched tea going cold on the tray and tried to organize what had just happened. He had fixed it. Immediately, cleanly, without bureaucratic hedging. He had known about the Aldous Gap. He had remembered my name after I said it once. And he had watched me hold that ledger in the rain and decided it was worth stopping for. I walked out through the administrative hall, past the clerks and the ink smell and the worn stone floor, and back into the pale morning outside. The wrong thing was being fixed. I should have felt finished. I did not feel finished. The Bureau sent the correction timeline to the Coalition office 4 days later. It was accurate, detailed, and faster than anything I had seen come through official channels in 3 years of working for the Coalition. The recalculation was complete. The credit system for affected settlements was clearly laid out. It was, by every practical measure, exactly what I had asked for. My supervisor, a broad-shouldered woman named Hedda, who had been running the Coalition for 15 years and had the particular exhaustion of someone who has fought the same battles for a very long time, read through the document twice, and then looked at me. How, she said. I stood in front of his horse, I said. Hedda looked at me for a long moment. You stood in front of the Alpha King's horse, in the market square. during the quarterly progress. Another long moment. Sarah, the formal channels weren't working, I said. And the Aldous Gap, I know about the Aldous Gap, she said, with the tone of someone who has definitely used the Aldous Gap herself at some point. She looked back at the document. This is good work. The settlements will feel this before winter. I nodded. That was the part that mattered. Hallows Creek and the 11 other settlements on the ridge, real people with real tools they had sold to pay taxes on crops the numbers hadn't accounted for. Before winter, Hedda had said. That was soon enough to matter. I went back to my desk and tried to feel finished. 3 days passed. On the 4th day, a note arrived at the coalition office addressed to me specifically, on Citadel administrative paper, which was a heavier creamstock with a small embossed crest in the corner. It said, "There is a secondary discrepancy in the winter road maintenance allocation for the northern Borderland settlements. I believe you will have thoughts on it." See, that was all. Just see. I read it twice. Then I read it again. Then I put it on my desk and looked at it for approximately 4 minutes. He had found another problem. Or he had been looking for another problem. Those were 2 different things, and I could not tell which one this was. I picked up the note and read it a 4th time as if additional readings would clarify the distinction. They did not. I wrote back. I said I would need to see the allocation records to assess the discrepancy, and that if he could arrange access through legitimate channels, I would review them within the week. The access was arranged by the following morning. This time the guard at the records room gate was expecting me and had my name on a list. No Aldous Gap required. I went in, found the Winter Road maintenance files, and spent 6 hours going through them. He was right. There was a secondary discrepancy, not the same kind as the harvest assessment. This one was not negligence, but a structural problem in how the road maintenance budget was categorized, which meant that northern Borderland routes were being funded through a discretionary allocation that was first to be cut when the central budget was under pressure, rather than through the essential infrastructure line where they belonged. The northern routes were the only winter access for 11 settlements. When they degraded, those settlements became isolated from supply chains for months at a time. I built the corrected categorization argument. I put it in a new document. I cross-referenced it properly. I made 2 copies. And then I sat in the records room for a moment and thought about the fact that the Alpha King of the Crestfall Empire had personally identified a Borderland infrastructure problem and sent a note about it to a coalition records keeper he had met once in the rain. I could not make that into a normal shape no matter how I arranged it. I sent the corrected document back through the now established channel with a cover note that explained the structural fix and its implications. His response came the next morning. It said, "This is more complex than the harvest issue. I think it requires direct discussion. Are you available Thursday at the second bell?" See, I wrote back. Yes, Thursday at the second bell. I was in the same side room as before. Same table, same gray courtyard view. This time someone had actually poured the tea. He came in and sat across from me, and we talked about road maintenance budget categorization for 90 minutes. Which sounds like the least interesting thing 2 people could do with 90 minutes, and if you had described this meeting to me a month ago, I would have agreed with you. But he asked precise questions. He pushed back on 2 of my assumptions in ways that required me to think harder, not because he was being difficult, but because he had information about central budget pressures that I did not have and that genuinely complicated the picture. I adjusted 2 sections of my argument on the spot. He noticed the adjustments and did not comment on them except to nod once, which I was beginning to understand was his version of acknowledgement. At the end, he said the categorization change would be implemented in the next budget cycle, and that the northern routes would be moved to the essential infrastructure line permanently. I said that was the right outcome. He looked at me for a moment. You adjusted your argument twice in this meeting. You had information I didn't, I said. Most people don't adjust, he said. They defend the original position regardless. That seems inefficient, I said. Something happened at the corner of his mouth again. That almost thing. Yes, he said. It is. I went home and made dinner, and sat at my table and thought about the way he said yes it is, like the word efficient was something he said to himself often and had not expected to hear back. Thursday became a recurring entry in my schedule. I told myself it was about the work. By the 6th Thursday, I had stopped pretending it was only about the work. This was not a comfortable realization. I sat with it for a full evening, prodding it the way you prod something you are not sure is safe, and eventually I arrived at the following honest assessment of the situation. I looked forward to Thursdays more than any other day of the week. I thought about our conversations in the hours between them. When I found something interesting in the records, I had a reflexive impulse to tell him about it before I remembered that telling him about it required waiting until Thursday. I had started keeping a small running list on the back page of my current working ledger of things to mention. The list had 7 items on it by Wednesday evening every week, without fail. These were not the behaviors of someone who was thinking only about Borderland infrastructure. The problem was that he was the Alpha King of the Crestfall Empire, and I was a coalition records keeper who had originally obtained access to the Citadel through a lunch-distracted gate guard, and the idea that the situation was anything other than professional was so structurally unlikely that I could not hold it seriously without feeling slightly ridiculous. So, I held it quietly, in the back of things, and went to my Thursdays and did the work and kept the list on the back page of the ledger. The 7th Thursday was different. He was already in the room when I arrived, which had not happened before. He was standing at the window, looking at the courtyard, with the expression of someone who has been thinking about something difficult for a while and has not resolved it. He turned when I came in. There is something I need your assessment on that is not an infrastructure problem, he said. I put my ledger on the table. All right, 3 of the Borderland settlements in the northern cluster have been sending petitions to the council about pack integration rights, he said. He sat down. I sat down. The current charter gives the eastern settlements full integration status. The northern cluster was incorporated later under a different administrative process, and their integration rights are classified as provisional, which means they have a lower tier of council representation, and their grievances go through an additional review layer before reaching formal consideration. I knew about this. It was one of the older structural problems in the coalition's advocacy list. They've been provisional for 11 years, I said. Yes, he looked at the table. The council has consistently deferred full integration on the grounds that the provisional status requires a formal re-evaluation process, and the re-evaluation process requires resources that are always allocated elsewhere first. The drawer, I said. He looked up. Under review, I said, which means in the drawer. Something in his expression shifted. Not quite that almost smile. Something more serious. Yes, he said. That is exactly what it means. He paused. I want to move this forward. The provisional classification is not defensible on merit at this point. 11 years of consistent settlement stability and tax compliance and community integration by every practical measure except the formal one. He looked at me directly. I need someone to build the case for full reclassification in a way that preempts the council's standard deferral arguments. Someone who understands how the deferral process works from the inside. I looked at him. You want me to build the argument. I want you to build the argument, he confirmed. This was significantly larger than corrected tax assessments or road budget categories. A formal reclassification of Northern Settlement integration status would require council approval, public documentation, potentially a legal charter amendment. The coalition had been trying to move this forward for years through standard advocacy channels. This will take more than a Thursday, I said. I know. I will need full records access, not just the administrative wing. The charter archives. I will arrange it, and I will need to be able to speak directly with you when I find things that require clarification, not just on a scheduled basis. He was quiet for a moment. That can be arranged as well. I looked at him across the table. The gray courtyard light came through the window between us, and the tea was getting cold again, because neither of us ever remembered the tea, and I had a list of 7 things on the back page of my ledger that I had not mentioned yet. Why me? I asked. The coalition has senior advocates who have been working on Northern integration for years. They have more experience with the council chamber than I do. They know the political landscape better. He was quiet for longer this time. Because they have been working on it for years through the standard channels, he said finally, and the standard channels have produced 11 more years of provisional status. He looked at me steadily. You stood in front of my horse in the rain with a ledger full of correct numbers, and you did not move until someone listened. I need that specific quality for this specific problem. I held his gaze. That specific quality got me escorted out of 3 council meetings, I said. I know, he said. I read your file. I stared at him. You read my file. After the market square, he said. Yes, there is a file. Everyone who uses the Aldous Gap gets a file, he said. Standard practice. I sat back slightly. He had read my file after the market square, and then sent me a note about a road maintenance discrepancy, and then arranged Thursday meetings, and now he was handing me the largest advocacy case the coalition had been trying to crack for over a decade. The list on the back page of my ledger suddenly seemed very small. All right, I said. I will build the argument. He nodded. And then, because he was him, he picked up his tea and finally drank it even though it was completely cold, with no reaction whatsoever, and moved on to the specifics. I picked up my pen and started writing. The charter archives were on the 4th level of the Citadel's East Tower. Nobody used them regularly. You could tell from the dust on the higher shelves and the way the archivist, an elderly man named Pell, looked at me with such genuine surprise on my first morning that I wondered how long it had been since anyone had come up those stairs wanting something other than a specific document retrieval. The full Northern Settlement Incorporation records, I told him, everything from the original provisional classification decision forward. He found me 8 boxes. I spent the first 3 days just reading, not building anything yet. Just reading. In the way my father had taught me to approach a new plant, you look at everything first. You do not start drawing conclusions until you have seen the whole shape of it. The provisional classification decision from 11 years ago. The subsequent re-evaluation requests. The council responses. The deferral justifications. The pattern of those justifications, which became visible only when you read all of them together rather than individually. The pattern was this. The council never denied the re-evaluation requests on merit. They deferred them on process. There was always a procedural reason why now was not the right time. A budget cycle. A pending charter review. A committee restructuring. Each individual deferral was defensible. The accumulated effect of 11 consecutive defensible deferrals was that nothing had moved in 11 years. This was useful. It meant the argument I needed to build was not about merit, because merit was not what was being contested. It was about process. Specifically, it was about demonstrating that the process itself had become the barrier, which was a different and more interesting argument to make. On the 4th day, he came to the archive. Not at the second bell. Mid-morning, unscheduled, He came up the stairs and found me at the long reading table surrounded by the contents of 3 boxes, organized into piles by date and category, with a working document in the center that had notes in 3 different colored inks, because I had run out of regular ink on day 2 and Pell had given me what he had. He looked at the table. Then at the 3 colored inks. "The blue is the original records," I said, before he could ask. "The red is the deferral justifications. The green is what I'm building." He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. He looked at the green notes. "Show me where you are." I showed him. He read without interrupting. He asked 2 questions, both precise and both about things I had not fully resolved yet, which told me he had been thinking about the same problem from his own angle and had hit the same walls I had hit. "The deferral chain," he said. "That's the argument." "Yes," I said. "Not that the provisional classification is wrong on its merits, because the council already knows it is. The argument is that 11 consecutive process deferrals constitute a de facto permanent denial, which violates the Charter's implicit promise of accessible re-evaluation. You need a precedent," he said. "Another case where accumulated deferrals were ruled equivalent to denial." "I know. I'm looking." I gestured at box 6, which I had not opened yet. Pell thinks there may be something in the pre-consolidation records from about 30 years back. He reached over and opened box 6 himself. He started looking. We spent 4 hours in the archive that morning. He found the precedent in box 6, a minor territorial re-evaluation case from 29 years ago, where the council tribunal had ruled that 6 consecutive procedural deferrals constituted constructive denial. It was not a perfect match, but it was a match. And in legal argument, a match you can work with is worth 20 perfect arguments that do not exist. I wrote it into the green notes immediately. "That's it," I said. "That's it," he agreed. I looked up from the notes. He was already looking at me, and for a moment neither of us said anything, and the archive was very quiet around us, just the sound of old paper and the distant citadel sounds filtering up from below, and his dark gold eyes were doing something I had been carefully not examining too closely for several weeks. I looked back at my notes. "I will need 2 more weeks to build the full formal document," I said. "Take what you need," he said. He left mid-afternoon, back to whatever a king does with the rest of his day. I stayed until Pell started making the quiet sounds of someone preparing to close up, which was his polite way of indicating it was time to go. Walking back through the citadel corridors, I passed a window that looked out over the market square. Gray afternoon, a few vendors still out, ordinary people doing ordinary things. The spot where I had stood in front of his horse was not marked in any way. It was just square stones like every other square stone. I thought about him reading my file after the market square, about the note on cream paper that said C, about the way he had opened box 6 himself and started looking without being asked. I thought about Thursdays and the list on the back of my ledger. I thought about the archive this morning and 4 hours that felt like 40 minutes, and I thought about a thing my mother had said to me once, in the way mothers say the true things, which is apparently at random moments when you are not prepared to receive them. She had said, "Sarah, the problem with you is that you only notice what is directly in front of you when it is also wrong. The right things you walk past entirely." I stopped walking for a moment in the corridor. Then, I kept going. But I was thinking about it. The formal document took 11 days, not 2 weeks. I was motivated. I sent it through the now-established channel on a Thursday morning, which meant I arrived at the second bell meeting with nothing specific to discuss for the first time since we had started meeting. I sat down across from him and he looked at me and I said, "I sent the document this morning. You should have it." He looked at the table between us. No ledgers, no boxes, no colored ink notes. "So," he said. "So," I said. A pause. The courtyard was doing something interesting with the light this morning, the autumn sun coming in at a low angle that made the gray stone look almost warm. "There is no current infrastructure problem requiring your assessment," he said. "No," I said. "The Northern Integration document is complete." "Yes, which means," he said, with the careful precision of someone navigating something, "there is no formal reason for this meeting." I looked at him directly. "Is that what you want? To stop the meetings?" A longer pause, the kind that has weight in it. "No," he said. Something in my chest did a thing I was not going to examine in real time. "Then we could just talk," I said, without a problem to solve. He looked slightly uncertain for the first time since I had met him, which was interesting on his face. Uncertainty did not sit there naturally. It was a visiting expression. "I am not certain I know how to do that," he said. "Talk without an agenda. I don't believe you," I said. "You talked to me in the archive for 4 hours on Tuesday. That was about the precedent case. For about 40 minutes, I said. For the rest of it, you told me about the consolidation period and why the pre-consolidation charter structure actually made more legal sense than what replaced it, and I told you about what Borderland winters actually look like compared to how they're described in the administrative records, and none of that was about the precedent case." He was quiet. "That was talking without an agenda," I said. "You did it fine." Something settled in his expression. The uncertainty moved out, and something more comfortable moved in. "Hallows Creek," he said. "You said your mother's family is from there." "Yes, what is it like?" I thought about it properly, the way you think about a place you have not been to in 3 years. "Small," I said. "The ridge is higher there than the maps make it look. In winter, the mist comes in from the east and sits in the valley below the village for weeks at a time, so you look out in the morning and it looks like the village is floating above clouds." I paused. My grandmother had a house at the edge of it. You could sit on her back step and watch the mist move. It looked like breathing. He was listening with the total quality of attention I had noticed before. Like what you were saying was worth hearing all the way to the end. "I have never been to the Eastern Ridge," he said. "The administrative records do not do it justice," I said. "The administrative records do not do most things justice," he said. "They are accurate about quantities. They are not accurate about what things feel like." I looked at him. "Is that a problem you think about? The gap between what the records say and what things actually are?" "Constantly," he said. "It is one of the more persistent frustrations of governing from a central seat. Everything that reaches me has been processed, filtered through whoever wrote it down. By the time information arrives here, it has been through several sets of hands and several sets of assumptions, and I am making decisions about people and places based on documents that are accurate about the numbers and silent about everything else." "That's why you stopped for the ledger," I said. "In the market square." He looked at me. "You said I was holding it like it was the most important thing in the square," I said. "But that's not why you stopped. You stopped because something unfiltered came directly to you and you didn't want to wave it past." A long pause. "Yes," he said. It came out quietly. "That is more accurate." We talked for 2 hours. Not about infrastructure or charters or budget categories, about the gap between records and reality, and about what it felt like to grow up on the ridge, and about a pre-consolidation governance structure he found genuinely elegant from a design perspective, and about why my mother thought my inability to leave wrong things alone was a liability, and why I was increasingly uncertain she was right. That last part I had not planned to say. It came out in the flow of conversation and sat on the table between us, and he looked at it thoughtfully. "I don't think she is right," he said. "You benefit from it directly," I said. "You're biased." I am also in a position to compare you to a significant number of people who do leave wrong things alone, he said. The comparison is informative. I looked at my hands on the table. Can I ask you something? I said. You always ask that before asking anyway, he said. Almost dry. That almost thing. When you sent the note, I said. About the road maintenance discrepancy. Was there actually a discrepancy? Or were you I stopped? I was not sure how to finish that sentence without it becoming something neither of us had named yet. He was quiet for a moment. There was a discrepancy, he said. It was real, and it needed to be fixed. A pause. It was also, he said, carefully, an opportunity to make contact through an established professional framework rather than through a less definable motivation. I looked at him. Less definable, I said. Yes, he said. We looked at each other across the table for a moment, then his aide knocked on the door with an afternoon council matter and the moment folded itself away, and we returned to being what we were supposed to be. But it did not disappear. The Northern Integration document went to the council on a Monday. By Wednesday, the council had responded with a request for supplementary documentation addressing 3 specific procedural points, which Hedda brought to me with an expression that I recognized as her version of impressed, which was essentially indistinguishable from her regular expression, except that one eyebrow was fractionally higher. They're engaging with it, she said. They're not deferring to committee. The precedent case makes deferral harder, I said. You found a precedent case. Hedda put the council's response on my desk. In 30-year-old pre-consolidation records. Pell was helpful, I said. Hedda looked at me for a long moment. Sarah, how much time have you spent in the Citadel archives in the past 3 weeks? Some time, I said. And how much time in direct meeting with the Alpha King? I organized the papers on my desk. The Thursday meetings have been productive for the coalition's advocacy work. That's not what I asked. I looked up. Hedda was watching me with the expression of someone who has 15 years of experience reading situations and has read this one. It's professional, I said. I didn't say it wasn't, she said, pleasantly, and went back to her office. I sat at my desk for a moment, then I picked up the council's supplementary questions and started working through them. The 3 supplementary points were substantive and required real work, not just clarification. I spent Thursday morning in the archives again and arrived at the second bell meeting with notes rather than the finished supplement, which meant we spent the session working through the questions together, which had become the natural shape of Thursdays without either of us deciding it would be. He caught a flaw in my argument for the second supplementary point that I had missed. The charter language, he said, pointing at a specific clause. Here, this phrasing substantial community integration is undefined in the charter itself. The council will use the ambiguity to reopen the merit question even though the precedent case forecloses the process question. I read the clause. He was right. I need to define it before they do, I said. Put my definition in the supplement with supporting evidence. The settlement stability records, he said. Tax compliance, community infrastructure, inter-settlement cooperation data. Build the definition from the evidence so there is no room for an alternative reading. I was already writing. He watched me write for a moment. You do that without looking at the page, he said. What? Right, your eyes stay on the source material. The pen moves independently. I looked at my notes. He was right, I had not been watching my own hand. My father's habit, I said. He was a surveyor. He mapped the ridge roads. He used to say that if you look at your pen you start writing what you think you saw instead of what you actually saw. He was quiet for a moment. Your father mapped the northern ridge roads. Some of them, I said. The routes that were reclassified in the maintenance budget issue, actually. He did the original survey. Something crossed his face. The roads your father mapped are the ones that degraded because they were in the discretionary allocation. Yes, I said. I had not made that connection out loud before, though I had thought it. He looked at the notes between us. I'm sorry, he said. He stopped. He was not a man who reached for words easily, and right now he was looking for ones that were adequate and finding the space where they should be unexpectedly large. It's all right, I said. He died before the degradation was significant. He did not see the roads go wrong. I paused, but he would have been very unhappy about it. He was meticulous about those surveys. He would have taken it personally. He should have, he said. It was his work. Yes, I said. We sat with that for a moment. The archive was quiet around us, the old paper smell, the low autumn light through the window. Tell me about him, he said. Not a formal request, just simple and direct. So I told him. About a surveyor who came home with mud on his boots and maps covered in tiny, precise notations, who had taught me to read a landscape the same way he had taught me to read a document, by looking at the whole shape before drawing any conclusions, who had said, more than once, that the most dangerous thing a person could do was mistake the map for the territory, who had died in the spring 3 years ago and left me his surveying equipment and his habit of not looking at the pen. He listened, all the way to the end, the way he always did. When I finished, he said, he sounds like someone who understood what things actually were. Yes, I said. He did. That is rarer than it should be. Yes, I said again. We looked at each other across the notes and the autumn light and the quiet archive and the less definable motivation that he had named carefully 2 weeks ago and neither of us had named since was present in the room in a way that was becoming harder to treat as background. I picked up my pen. I should finish the supplement, I said. Yes, he said. He did not move immediately. Then he did. We worked for another hour. The supplement took shape. The argument tightened. By the time Pell started his closing routine downstairs, the second and third supplementary points were resolved. The first one, the undefined substantial community integration, I finished that evening at home, alone at my table, in the handwriting that moves without looking at the page. I thought about my father's roads. I thought about Thursdays. I thought about less definable motivations and what it meant that he had named them and I had not pushed, and neither of us had walked away. The council approved the Northern Integration reclassification on a gray November morning. Hedda came to find me in the archives, where I had been doing follow-up work on a completely separate issue, and stood in the doorway and said, "It passed. Full integration status. Effective the 1st of next month." I put down the document I was holding. "All 11 settlements?" I said. "All 11, she said. Unanimous, which apparently has not happened in that council chamber in 4 years. I sat with that for a moment. Hollows Creek, the other 10 settlements on the northern ridge, 11 years of provisional status, 2 tiers of council representation, the additional review layer that had put everything in the drawer. Done, finished, not in the drawer anymore. My eyes stung. I pressed my fingers against them quickly. "Go home," Hedda said, not unkindly. "You have been in this archive for 3 weeks. Go home and sleep." I went home. I did not sleep. I sat at my table and thought about my grandmother's house on the ridge, and the mist that looked like breathing, and my father's maps, which were in a rolled tube in the corner of my room, and I thought about 11 years and 1 ledger in the rain and Thursdays, and a man who read my file after the market square. I wrote him a note. It said, "The council approved full integration this morning. Unanimous. Thank you for the precedent case. S. His response came by evening. It said, "The precedent case was in your box 6. You would have found it. I just opened the lid. Come Thursday. See, I read that 3 times. You would have found it. I just opened the lid." Thursday was 4 days away. 4 days felt very long. This was a problem. I recognized it clearly and sat with it the way I had sat with the realization about Thursdays several weeks ago, and the realization about the list on the back of the ledger, and the realization about my mother possibly being wrong. I was good at recognizing things. I was less good at knowing what to do with them once recognized. What I knew was this: he was the Alpha King of the Crestfall Empire. I was a coalition records keeper. The professional framework that had given us Thursdays would not exist once the northern integration work was complete. There was no current infrastructure problem. The formal document was done. The supplementary questions were answered. The council had voted. The professional reason for Thursdays was over. Whatever Thursday was now, it was something else, and I did not know if he knew that, or if I should say it, or if saying it would be the thing that made it real in a way that could not be managed, and I went around this circle approximately 40 times over the next 4 days before Thursday arrived, and I put on my coat and went to the Citadel anyway because apparently I was not capable of not going. He was already in the room. Like the 7th Thursday, the one where everything had shifted, standing at the window. He turned when I came in. "The formal work is done," I said, before he could speak. Because I had decided on the walk over that I was not going to do the thing where we pretend the situation is what it was 3 months ago. I am not good at pretending things. It tends to go badly. "Yes," he said, "so this Thursday is not about an infrastructure problem." "No," he said, "and the next one won't be either." "No," he said again. He was watching me with the focused quality of someone who is following an argument very carefully because the conclusion matters. "I need to know," I said, "what this is." "Because I have been," I stopped. Started again. "I have a list on the back of my working ledger, 7 items every Wednesday. Things I want to tell you. I have had it for 2 months, and I have not told anyone about it because I did not know what it meant, and I did not want to name it wrong." I looked at him directly. "What is this?" A long silence. He crossed the room. Not quickly. Deliberately. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I had to look up at him. And his dark gold eyes were doing the thing that I had been carefully not examining, and this time I looked at it directly. "I read your file after the market square," he said, "because I wanted to know your name. Not for administrative reasons." He paused. The road maintenance discrepancy was real. The note was also an excuse. I have been aware of both of those things simultaneously since the day I sent it. I held his gaze. "You could have just said that. You could have asked," he said. "I am asking now," I said. He looked at me for a moment. "You are also arguing," he said. "You have been arguing continuously since you arrived." "I am not arguing," I said. "I am being precise. About the nature of Thursdays," he said. "About the nature of yes. About Thursdays. About the list. About what he kissed me. Not roughly. Not carelessly. But with the complete decisive quality of a man who has made a choice and is done deliberating about it." His hand came up to my jaw, and he kissed me, and the argument stopped mid-sentence. And then the world cracked open. That is the only way I can describe it. Not metaphorically. Something physically happened. A warmth that started at my mouth and spread outward through my chest, and down my arms and into my hands in a wave that was not like anything I had felt before, bright and certain and enormous, like something that had been waiting had finally been told yes. I pulled back. My hands were on his chest. I did not remember putting them there. He was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. something between shock and wonder and absolute certainty all at once. "What was that?" I said. "I don't know," he said. His voice was different, quieter, but we both knew. We both already knew. Neither of us moved for a moment. My hands were still on his chest. His hand was still at my jaw, not holding, just resting, like he had forgotten to lower it. The warmth that had spread through me in that wave had settled into something quieter, but it had not gone away. It was sitting in my chest like something that had always been there and had simply never been activated before. "The mate bond," I said. It came out flat. Not dramatically, just naming the thing in front of us. "Yes," he said. His voice was still that quieter version. I stepped back. Not away from him specifically, just needing the space to think, which required slightly more physical distance than we currently had. He let his hand drop. "That was not," I started. "Planned," he said. "No." I looked at him. He was watching me with an expression I was still learning, the combination of certainty and something raw underneath it that his face did not usually permit. "You kissed me to stop the argument," I said. "Yes, and you did not know that would happen." "No," he said. "I have never." He stopped. Started differently. Mate bonds are not universal. Not every alpha experiences one. I had assumed another stop. I had stopped assuming I would. I absorbed this. You had stopped expecting it. "Yes, and now it has happened," I said, in a Thursday meeting. Because I was being precise about the nature of Thursdays. Something moved in his expression. That almost thing at the corner of his mouth, under entirely different circumstances than before, carrying a completely different weight. "Yes," he said. "That is an accurate account of events." I sat down. Not because I was faint. Because I needed to sit down and think, and standing up while doing it felt insufficient. He remained standing, watching me, giving me the space to process at my own pace, which was one of the things about him I had been not examining for 2 months. The mate bond. I knew what it meant in theory, the way everyone in this world knows it in theory. A fundamental recognition between two wolves at a biological and spiritual level, binding and permanent, and not something that could be undone or chosen away from. A connection between two specific people that the wolf nature recognized as its other half. I was not a wolf. I was a human, coalition records keeper, daughter of a surveyor, person who stood in front of horses in the rain with correct ledgers. "I'm human," I said. "I know," he said. "Does the mate bond, can it work across rarely?" he said. "But yes, it is documented. A human mate is rarer, but not without precedent." He paused. "You felt it too. It was not quite a question." "Yes," I said. I felt it. He sat down then, across from me, same table, same positions we had been in for months of Thursdays. The room looked the same. The gray courtyard through the window looked the same. Everything in the room was the same, and nothing was the same. "I need to think," I said. "Of course." Not because I stopped. I wanted to be precise about this, which was my way always. But precision required words, and the words for this were very large. Not because I don't feel it. I feel it. I felt it immediately, and I can feel it right now, and it is not going away. I looked at him. But I am a person who thinks before she acts. On large things. I need to think. "Take what you need," he said. The same words he had said about the charter document. I looked at my hands on the table. "You said you had stopped expecting this." "Yes, so when it happened I tried to find the right shape for the question. Are you certain?" "Not of the bond. I know the bond is certain. Are you certain about whether you want this? Because it is also very large, and it came from an argument about Thursdays, and I want to know that you are not just Sarah, he said. I stopped. I read your file because I wanted to know your name, he said. I invented a professional reason to send you a note. I came to the archive on a Tuesday morning because I wanted to be in the same room as you and did not have a formal justification. I have been finding formal justifications for 2 months. He held my gaze steadily. I am certain. I looked at him for a long moment. The list on the back of my ledger, I said. 7 things every Wednesday. Yes, the top item this week was a thing I found in the pre-consolidation records about how the original Ridge Road surveys were classified versus how current surveys are classified, and why it creates a discrepancy in the maintenance funding formula. He looked at me. The second item, I said, was less about infrastructure. Something in his expression opened, the way a window opens when someone reaches for the latch and finally pushes. Tell me the second item, he said. I noticed, I said carefully, that when you find something interesting in a document, you make a very small sound. Almost nothing, just a slight exhale. And I noticed that I had started listening for it. Silence, that is the second item, he said. Yes, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I do the same thing. I have noticed that you make a small sound when you catch a flaw in your own argument before I catch it. A sort of quiet like you are annoyed at yourself, but also pleased. I stared at him. You noticed that. 2 months ago, he said. We looked at each other across the Thursday table. The mate bond sat in my chest like a warm-held breath. I need to think, I said again. But it was quieter this time. I know, he said. I'll be here. I did think. For 2 days. Not anxiously. Not circling the same ground the way I had circled the question of Thursdays for 2 months without resolution. This was different thinking, clearer. I sat with it the way my father had taught me to sit with a landscape before mapping it, letting the whole shape of it settle before picking up the pen. The whole shape of it was this. The mate bond had happened. I had felt it, and it was real, and it was not going away. That was not a question. The question was what I wanted, not what the bond wanted, not what was expected, not what made logical sense given the structural improbability of the situation. What I, Sarah Voss, records keeper and surveyor's daughter and person who could not leave wrong things alone, actually wanted. I went through it honestly. I wanted Thursdays. I had wanted Thursdays for 2 months before I admitted it. I wanted the archive mornings and the cold tea and the specific quality of attention he brought to everything, the way he listened all the way to the end. I wanted the almost dry thing at the corner of his mouth. I wanted the slight exhale when he found something interesting, and the fact that he had noticed my quiet 2 months ago and had not mentioned it until now. I wanted the second item on the Wednesday list. I wanted, more than I had wanted most things, to find out what it looked like when we were not navigating professional frameworks and invented pretexts and careful precision about the nature of Thursdays. What it looked like when neither of us was finding justifications. I went back on the 3rd day. Not Thursday. A Wednesday. I went to the Citadel and asked for him through the formal channel and waited in the side room, and when he came in and saw me there, 1 day early, his expression did the thing it had done the first time I walked into a room he was already in. Something that was visiting and did not usually live there. Something like relief. I had not planned what I was going to say. I had decided that planning it would produce something too organized for what this actually was. I thought about it, I said. He sat down. And? The mate bond did not create what I feel, I said. I want to be clear about that. What I feel has been accumulating for 2 months through cold tea and archive boxes, and a note on cream paper that said C. I looked at him. The bond recognized something that was already there. It didn't build it. He was very still. I am still a coalition records keeper, I said. I am still the person who stands in front of horses in the rain. That is not going to change, and I need you to understand that before anything else. I am not going to perform a different version of myself for this. I know that. He said. I am also going to argue with you, I said. Regularly, about things that matter. Because I cannot leave wrong things alone, and some of the wrong things will be decisions you have made. I know that too, he said. And I need the professional work to continue, I said. The coalition work, the advocacy, not as a framework for something else, as its own real thing. Yes, he said. Simple. No condition. I looked at him. You are being very agreeable. I am agreeing with things I agree with, he said. That is not always how agreement works in practice. No, he admitted, but these specific things I agree with genuinely. He paused. I also have a list. I stared at him. You have a list. Not on the back of a ledger, he said. I do not have the same organizational instinct. It is more of a running account. In my head. What is on it? He looked at the table briefly. Then, back at me. The way you organized the archive boxes by color when you ran out of ink, he said. The fact that you arrived 20 minutes early to every Thursday meeting for 3 months and thought I did not notice. The thing you said about your grandmother's house and the mist that looked like breathing. He paused. The fact that in 6 years of council meetings I have not once heard someone say the drawer as a complete argument, and when you said it I knew exactly what you meant, and so did every person in that room. I was quiet. That is the account, he said. Approximately, I looked at him for a long moment. The gray courtyard through the window. The tea on the tray between us. Wednesdays, apparently, were the same as Thursdays except 1 day earlier and without the pretense. The kiss, I said. You did it to stop the argument. Yes, he said. It did not stop the argument, I said. I was going to continue arguing. The kiss just interrupted it. I know, he said. You were saying about the nature of Thursdays, I finished. Yes, I was right about Thursdays, I said. You were right about Thursdays, he agreed. I am usually right about things, I said. I know, he said, and this time the almost thing at the corner of his mouth became something more complete. A real smile, which I had not seen before in its full form, and it did something significant to his face. Made it younger. Made it the face of a person rather than a position. I felt the mate bond in my chest, warm and settled and certain. You should know, I said, that the top item on next Wednesday's list is already about you, not about infrastructure. What is it? He said. I'll tell you next Wednesday, I said. He looked at me. That is deliberately withholding information. Yes, I said, I am aware. The smile again, complete this time. Then I'll be here Wednesday, he said. Wednesday came and I told him the top item on the list. It was this. I had noticed that when he was thinking through something difficult, something that had no clean answer, he went very quiet in a specific way. Not the controlled quiet of a man managing his expression. A different quiet. The kind that meant he was actually inside the problem, not performing consideration of it. And that I had started to be able to tell the difference between those two silences, and that the second one, the real one, was the one I trusted absolutely. He listened to this without interrupting. Then he said, That is the most precise thing anyone has ever said about how I think. I have been paying attention, I said. I know, he said. I find it. He stopped. Looking for the word. Steadying, he said finally. To be seen that specifically. I thought about what it must be like to be him. Not the power of it, not the difficulty of it, but the specific loneliness of being in every room the most visible person and simultaneously the least seen. Everyone watching the position, nobody watching the man who was occasionally uncertain, who went quiet in 2 different ways, who made a small exhale when he found something interesting in a document. You should know, I said, that I see both, I said. The position and the person inside it. He looked at me with an expression that was completely unguarded. I know, he said. That is the thing, Sarah. That is the specific thing. The weeks after the Wednesday conversation were different from the weeks before it. Not dramatically. Nothing had changed in the formal, visible structure of things, which required careful navigation, because the mate bond between an Alpha King and a human coalition records keeper was not a small political matter, and we were both aware that how it was handled publicly would affect not just us, but the people and settlements the coalition represented. He raised this directly on the following Thursday. No pretense now about why we were meeting. We were meeting because we were meeting. The council will need to be informed, he said, before they find out through other channels. Yes, I said. And the coalition. I thought about Hedda's expression when she had asked about the Thursday meetings. My supervisor already suspects something. What did you tell her? That it was professional, I said, which was accurate at the time. And now? Now it is also something else, I said. I will tell her the truth. Hedda is practical. She will assess the implications for the coalition's relationship with the Citadel, and she will decide whether it strengthens or complicates our advocacy position. And if she decides it complicates it? I thought about this honestly. Then she and I will have a difficult conversation about how to manage it, I said. The coalition's independence from the Citadel is important. I am not going to pretend that it is uncomplicated. He nodded. I would not want you to. I know, I said. That is also on the list. Hedda took it with the specific calm of someone who had already worked out most of it and was now simply receiving confirmation. She looked at me across her desk for a long moment after I finished speaking. The Northern integration, she said. The road reclassification. These were genuine. Yes, I said. The work was real. The problems were real. The solutions were real. And the Thursday meeting were also genuine, I said. And also something else simultaneously. Hedda was quiet for a moment. The coalition needs to maintain its independence, she said. Our credibility with the Borderland settlements depends on being seen as separate from Citadel interests. I know. Which means your role at the coalition needs to remain your role, she said. Defined by the work, not by this. I agree, I said. And if there is ever a conflict between what this relationship asks of you and what the coalition's advocacy requires, I will tell you immediately, I said. And I will not compromise the coalition work. Hedda looked at me for another long moment. Then she said, You know what your mother used to say about you. I stared at her. You knew my mother? We grew up in neighboring villages, she said, which was something I had not known in 3 years of working for her. She used to say you only noticed things when they were wrong, that you walked past the right things. She may have been partially correct, I said. She was completely wrong, Hedda said. You notice everything. You are just selective about what you act on. She looked back at her desk. The northern settlements will receive their full integration status next month. Your father's road surveys will be used as the basis for the new maintenance categorization going forward. I think he would have been satisfied with that. My throat tightened. Yes, I said. He would. Go back to work, Hedda said, and tell the Alpha King that the coalition expects the same quality of engagement on Borderland matters that it has received in the past 3 months. I will tell him, I said. Exactly like that, she said. Not softer. I don't do things softer, I said. I know, said Hedda. It is your most useful quality and your most exhausting one. She picked up her pen. Close the door on your way out. I closed the door on my way out and stood in the corridor for a moment with my hand still on the handle. thinking about my mother who had grown up in a village next to Hedda's village, and my father whose maps were being used as the basis for a maintenance reclassification, and a grandmother's house where the mist looked like breathing. Everything connects to everything. You just cannot see it from inside any single moment. I went back to my desk and picked up my current working ledger and turned to the back page. The Wednesday list had 4 items on it already. Number 1 was not about infrastructure. Spring arrived in Crestfall the way it arrives in capital cities, gradually and then suddenly. The gray stone of the citadel warming by degrees until one morning you walk out and the light is different and the air has lost its edge and something in the world has shifted to a new setting. I noticed it on a Tuesday walking to the citadel through the market square. The spot where I had stood in front of his horse was just square stones, same as every other square stone. No marker, no particular significance visible from the outside. A woman was selling early spring vegetables from a cart nearby. 2 children were running between the market stalls with the focused energy of children who have been kept inside through winter and have just been released. An ordinary Tuesday morning in an ordinary market square. I had stood in this spot 7 months ago in the rain holding a ledger and refused to move. I thought about that version of me. She had not known what she was beginning. She had known about harvest tax discrepancies and survey classification errors and 11 years of a drawer that would not open. She had not known about Thursdays or archive boxes organized by color or a small exhale that meant something interesting had been found. She had not known that the horse she was standing in front of belonged to a man who read files because he wanted to know names, not for administrative reasons. I walked on through the square. The formal public announcement had been made 2 weeks ago, in the way these things are made, with appropriate ceremony and council presence and documentation. The coalition had released its own statement, drafted by Hedda with characteristic precision, noting the advocacy organization's independence while acknowledging the professional relationship that had produced significant policy outcomes for Borderland settlements. It was a document that managed several complicated things simultaneously, and I had read it 3 times with genuine admiration. The public response had been varied, which was to be expected. I was not a noble. I had no political heritage, no pack lineage, no family name. I was a surveyor's daughter from the Borderland coalition with mud on her metaphorical boots and a demonstrated inability to leave wrong things alone. Several council members had raised concerns about this. I had read their formal objections, which were technically framed but substantively about my origins, and I had thought about them carefully, and arrived at the conclusion that the concerns were real in the sense that they reflected genuine political anxieties, and that the right response to genuine anxieties was to address the substance rather than dismiss the source. I had drafted a response document myself. Not softened, just precise. Calder had read it and said it was more effective than anything his advisors had produced. I had said that was because his advisors were writing for the council's comfort, and I was writing for the council's actual concerns, which were different things. He had made the small exhale. That morning in the citadel we were in the study rather than the side room, which had shifted naturally sometime in the previous month as the formal Thursday structure had dissolved into something less scheduled and more ongoing. The study had the maps on the wall and the north-facing window and the fire that burned for warmth rather than atmosphere, and it had become, incrementally, a room that felt like both of ours rather than his. I had brought the updated Borderland water access records, which was the current coalition priority, and which had already produced 2 informal discussions that were beginning to look like they might become the thing after Northern integration in terms of structural importance. He looked up from the water access documents when I came in. "There is something I want to show you," I said. "In the records?" "Not in the records," I said. I put the documents on his desk. Later, after this, We worked through the water access material for the morning. He caught 2 things I had missed, which continued to be annoying and also continued to be one of the things on the list. I caught one thing he had missed, which he acknowledged without defensiveness, which was not a small thing in a man who had spent years being the person in every room who was not questioned. At midday, he said he had a council session. After, I said, the thing I want to show you. After, he agreed. The council session apparently ran long because it was late afternoon by the time we walked out through the Citadel's east gate and into the city, which I had not done with him before in any non-formal context. He had a guard at a distance, which was a negotiated compromise not at his elbow, just present, and we walked through the afternoon streets of Crestfall toward the market square. The vegetable cart woman was still there, packing up her remaining stock. The children from the morning were gone. The square was in the low gold light of late afternoon, the stone warm from the day's sun. I stopped in a specific spot. Here, I said. He looked at the square. He looked at me. This is where I stood, I said. In the rain, 7 months ago. He looked at the stone under our feet. Then he looked up, in the direction that would have been his, coming through the square on the horse in the procession. I saw you from here, he said. He was orienting it. He turned slightly. There, before everyone else stepped back. Yes, I said. We stood in the spot for a moment. If I had looked away, he said. If the guard had moved you aside, then the harvest assessment would still be wrong, I said. And the road reclassification would still be in the drawer. And the northern settlements would still be provisional. I paused. And I would not have known about the Aldous Gap, or the precedent case, or the exhale. He looked at me in the late afternoon market square. Sarah, he said. Yes, next time you argue with me, he said, I am not going to kiss you to stop it. No, I agreed. That backfired significantly. For both of us, he said. The real smile, full and complete. For both of us, I said. The mate bond sat in my chest, warm and permanent and entirely certain. The spring light held on the square stones. We walked back through the market, not hurrying, through the ordinary Tuesday evening of an ordinary city where nothing looked different from the outside, but everything, underneath, had changed. I had a new item for the Wednesday list already. It was not about infrastructure.